Welcome to the Power of Design podcast. My name is Jack Osa. I'm an architect, born and raised in Colombia, South America. Years ago, I migrated to the United States to follow my dreams. And today, I'm the founder and principal of Osa Studio, a multidisciplinary architectural design firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. In this podcast, we talk about design, business, creativity, and the inspiration we need to create an exciting and powerful built environment. In today's episode of the Power of Design podcast, I'm talking to David Dial. David is a creative, deep thinker, architect, artist, and designer. With over 35 years of experience leading people and projects for over 400 buildings, David brings a mature and interesting vision to the design and construction industries. Today, David is a developer, architect, and contractor simultaneously for his own firm. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. This is my conversation with David. David, welcome to the Power of Design podcast. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
How was your day today?
Eventful, full, which is a great thing. That's always a lot more fun.
Awesome. I know we met years ago.
Yes.
You contacted me on LinkedIn and we had a great conversation about design thinking.
Yeah.
And then we lost touch and now, I found you again. So, I want to thank you for all the help you have been giving me. Anytime I have questions with your expertise has been huge. And I know you're a design thinker like I am. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you.
Great. Honored to help. It's been
Awesome.
fun.
So, David, tell me a little bit about yourself,
Sure.
your career. Where did you grow up and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah. I'll try to make this brief. Wanted to be an architect since I was 6. Just the fact that somebody had to tell me when they were asking, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I described it. And they went, oh, you want to be an architect? I said, yeah, sounds about right. So obviously that's what I intended to do since through school. Got to the point where I was going to a state school for architecture. I was getting ready to go to a very large, predominant architecture program that didn't have a dean at the time. And I went, do I really want to do this? And at the time, Savannah College of Art and Design had started about 9 years before. And my art teacher gave me the brochure and I went to visit and I went, this is exactly what I wanted.
Cool.
Ironically, since I was 16, I actually started working for an architect, but he was a design build architect in a very small town. So he built everything that he designed. And I actually started on his construction crew and doing renderings for him in the evenings. So I was doing paintings, selling those as a teenager. I don't know if I really had a real job, but I did real labor to get whatever I needed to for the next big event coming up. So went to SCAD, met my bride there. She was at the School of Building Arts also to become an interior designer, and found kind of just my design partner, the person I love to design things with and talk about all the same things. And so that was a joy where I really don't see the difference between architecture and interior design. It's more of a focus scale.
Yeah.
So then spent 10 years there and then started working. I'd actually been working in an architecture firm since I went to school. So I loved the real world version of that I kind of knew of before.
Right.
And I enjoyed the pure art side of that also. So that was another part of it. I enjoy SCAD and getting to know other people and other professions, and had friends that went out to work at Pixar. And I was always fascinated about creative process.
Yeah.
And how they think and how it's similar and how it's different.
Sure.
And honestly, I've stole some of the best ideas I've ever had from somebody else in a different industry.
Yes.
So that was always that creative melting pot of enjoying just how to look at something.
Yeah. Did you feel that as you were going through school, your perception of what architecture is changed? And because I felt like that, like I thought I I knew what I was getting into,
Mm-hmm.
but it was different. Not good or bad.
Yeah.
It was just different. It was like discovering architecture. Like, okay, so it's not just about these walls and the buildings.
It really was, and it was that way for me on two sides. Since I'd started working in offices and had, architects that had been working for 50 years telling me what to do, and I was kind of like the bratty pirate kid.
Yeah.
I was always going to this person to learn, teach me how to tie ropes and teach me how to sail and teach me how to fight. And I was always bugging them trying to learn something else about architecture from the office side. And then you get to art school and you start really finding the difference between art and design.
Yes.
And that's something that I've always kind of bounced back and forth. But the biggest part to your question, I loved architecture because it was design and it was function. You got to build something. But I also love the part that it's kind of an anthropology.
Yep.
And the storytelling aspect of what that does has become something I've constantly woven into that, and as well as the psychology of that. How do you actually make a space that's productive for humans?
Yes.
And does it meet their needs?
Yeah. So do you think that is more focused on the process of creating architecture than the inherent value of architecture?
Oh, it's so strange because got to work with some ivory tower architecture firms while I was still in school and seeing how they came about it. And it truly was that, okay, we have this designer whose name you'll know, and they go off to the mountain and they come back with this design. And it's like, okay, that's one way.
Sure.
If it works, that's great. What I found was that, whenever you put together enough people and ask enough right questions, it really changes things.
Right.
Because what I always saw from the ivory tower side is it was their version of humanity.
Right.
And really specific from their view of anthropology, the way they grew up, which was rarely the same way that the average person grew up.
Sure.
So you started seeing that didn't really cross cultures,
right,
or even get to the average user.
Sure.
And so that was a confusing part that I had to kind of work out. I was like, why? But this person's famous.
Yes.
Why? And then I go, but they were doing this for an award.
Right.
Or they were doing it for the prestige.
For the pictures.
And so I started at that point kind of, getting kind of rejected the idea of the awards.
Right.
Because I started seeing, I worked in firms that all I did was the AIA applications for those things, and kind of started seeing how that was a process unto itself.
Sure.
But it didn't equate to good architecture.
Right.
Or even at that point, realizing there's architecture with a capital A.
Yeah.
And there's architecture with just a simple A.
Yeah. Well, I call it architecture and construction.
Yeah.
I think the architecture has part of art in it.
Mm-hmm.
You can do construction, just technique 100%, build a box and
have a happy client.
Yeah, that's right.
Make something a tool that they can use for who they're trying to serve.
Yeah.
So
okay. So what was that next step? You graduated.
I graduated, started working in bigger and bigger firms, running staffs of 50 people, and down to doing projects all over the world for Corps of Engineers and other people. Was one of our biggest clients, and enjoyed that. It was a great part of. I was still an intern, and I'm running a staff of architects and engineers because nobody stepped forward. It was one of those things. I was still the bratty pirate kid. It's like, well, if nobody's going to run the ship, then I'll step in.
Sure.
But it was kind of that point of we've all gotten to be creative. And it's like, well, do you want to be creative? Do you want to be the first chair in that symphony and be amazing at that technique and be known for that? Or do you want to write the music? Do you want to conduct the music? And I started finding out that I really enjoyed conducting.
Yeah.
That it was more fun.
Sure.
There was more to celebrate. There's more people to party with at the end of it and celebrate, what we all did together.
Yeah.
So that was a neat part of being part of a big firm. And then came to Charlotte in the late 90s to run an office for another firm out of Charleston. And just started building that from scratch, called a bunch of my friends from other places. And we were here for a couple of years before we realized that business was not that architecture firm's best practice. So I said, well, I've already gotten all these people come all over the country. I think it's time to start our own firm. So, at 28, 29, I'm doing something I never knew I would do. You started my own pirate ship.
Yeah.
And so I enjoyed getting to do that for 20 years. I've taken a couple of breaks and partnering with other firms and getting to work all over the world doing projects that I would have never had that opportunity for.
Yeah.
But it was always fun to go someplace else and say, that design principle does not work in this culture.
Right.
Or that would not be the perfect way to do this.
Sure.
Or even the way that they would even understand. So that was a lot of fun, just getting that exposure, kind of back to that anthropology side of architecture and design.
Yeah.
Is also kind of where I got loved the conducting to be able to teach and lead those, but also was missing that creativity. So I started painting again, which is where this all started to begin with. And that was the fun part to me, because design, you have to have a client, you have to have a problem.
Yeah.
And you need their feedback.
Sure.
And to be accurate about it. In art, the artist gets to make up all the rules and decide if it's successful or not based upon those rules.
Yep.
Which was like, oh, this is relief. I don't have that friction of getting tired of architecture, which was weird.
Sure.
So I just realized, oh, there's a time for this and there's a time for that. So, but it gave me the release that I wanted to be creative as I wanted to be in the time that I had. But then the other part of running groups of people or whole teams of things was also realizing that there's a lot of cross-pollination that wasn't happening. So this is design thinking that I actually got introduced by some friends that were friends at SCAD, but they actually became advertising salespeople. That I'm going, you're designing something? And it's like, no, we're using design thinking, which was a completely different process, which I loved to getting into that because it's all about the end user.
Right.
So you get that feedback by putting yourself to be empathetic.
Sure.
To that individual. Thus the reason I realized there's an architect that's actually talking about design thinking. I've got to call this guy. We got to go to lunch. And that was a joy. Yeah. It was fun to hear somebody else's view of the same thing.
Yeah. And it's not very common to find people that, they're aligned with your thinking. I don't find many architects who share my perception or view of architecture. I really see architecture as, the human perception of space.
Yes.
The thing is not what you're designing. We're designing the human experience of space, how that brain experiences the space, light, textures, functionality, colors. You take it as far as you want. But the architecture is just a means to do that.
Yes.
Is the tool.
Yeah.
And I feel that most of architecture culture focuses on the object, which is nice.
Yeah.
And has a sculptural value.
One dimension of it.
And it's nice. And there's some things that look nice. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's pretty. It's beauty, which we all need. But that's step one. There are other steps that are even more important because we're affected by it. Yes. The thing with aesthetics is that you can decide if you like it or not. But the experience, how you design the experience, your subconscious mind will react to it.
Right. Jack, I love the way you actually even think of that, the way you think of branding.
Yes.
It's almost the same. It's the same base stock for the whole meal that you don't differentiate that. And that's what I love about, that one comes from the other. Yeah.
And a lot of people ask me, so are you going to do branding or are you going to do architecture?
Why choose?
Inside, I'm like, isn't that the same? I think this is the same. Like,
yes.
Where's the difference?
I agree.
You have a different way to, explore it and materialize it, but internally, I think it's the same thing.
It's kind of like being a painter. Do you paint with watercolor or do you paint with oil? You have selective tools for those, but the creativity, the composition, the structure, the end result is still very similar.
Sure.
At least in my twisted little mind about that. But I love that you think that same way from your side of the table. That's interesting to follow.
When you're designing, let's say buildings, do you feel like you tend to hang on to some type of aesthetic or repetition or tricks that you have, or how do you keep yourself open-minded? And I ask because I find myself looking up two projects, and I was like, this is the same project.
Yes.
It's just different combination of the parts. But
Yes.
where was the creativity?
So in a couple of those stops along the bigger firms, they were known for a style.
Yeah.
Or even one group I got to work with had several Disney Imagineers in it. And whereas their process of thinking was another vein of design thinking, what I started realizing and looking over their work over and over and over, they started boiling the process down to something that would almost be like a product. And that's to me where, okay, this solution works in this part of the country, in this country, but if we move it 500 miles away, it has no context, it has no use, and it's not even working for the same people. So part of that is, I've seen where my intentionality isn't to be vernacular every time I do something, but I am more interested in what is the uniqueness of that client and what represents their point of view, not my point of view.
Yeah.
And maybe that part of that is because I still have art to do my point of view.
Yeah.
And it gives me that release to say, I don't have to have that control, nor am I interested in just giving you my version of what you should use.
Sure.
So, but that is a great question. And it was, I remember early on in my 20s being frustrated. It was like, well, why don't they see this as right and that this would work? And then I started quitting. I was like, okay, you're not paying for it. You're not using it. You are the blacksmith.
Yes.
And you need to make a tool that they get to go do their job with.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds very simplistic and it's easy to say, but it's something I'm always coming back to, probably because I'm more interested in their anthropology than I get to go express myself in another way. And I've found a lot of architects are very frustrated, and that pours out in their work if they don't have that outlet or something that feeds that. I think it's natural.
Yeah. I remember years ago here in Charlotte, Rafael Moneo came to do a lecture. That was easily 15 years ago, but I will never forget. He showed some projects and he focused most of his time, I would say 80%, defining the problem.
Yes.
And 20%, it was, this is the solution. But the problem definition phase, it was 80% of his process.
Yeah.
What is this problem about?
Those to me are the when you find a project that you're kind of fascinated and you get to find out the backstory.
Yes.
That is they're beautiful details. Of course, we're architects. We enjoy those details or those materials. But it's when you go, what was this solving? Because this is unique solution. Yeah. Are always the more interesting now. Yeah. As I get older. So I like questions more than answers.
Sure. Oh yeah. Yes. Tell me about what you're doing today, because I know you're not a normal architect. You're not practicing normal architecture.
Amen.
Yes. Tell me about, kind of that transition of where you are today. What happened?
So the irony is, I think because I got to start actually working and doing both in the field and the office at 15 and 16, I think I just fast forward, added another 10 years to my age of that. And I see a lot of architects about 10 years older than I am get frustrated with kind of some of the same things. Yeah. Ironically, the more working with big firms, medium firms, consulting groups, whatever else, it's those connections between the two where I've seen where architecture as a profession, corporately, the average firm, gets very frustrated with why can't we do this or that? Yeah. And when you start defining why are they frustrated, not to add blame, but to say, what is your map tell me where you are on the map. And you realize that some of those frustrations can become they have blinders on. Yes. Part of that to put it in the category of liability. Yeah. There is a great fear of liability from the school side as well as the practice side. Now, some of that is good and healthy. Yeah. And I don't mean to disparage that. But it also limitations the creative solutions.
100%. I think it overwhelms the design process.
Yes. It's like taboo. You can't go, don't do that. That's means and methods. Uh-huh. You can't really talk about that. In that, I think a lot of average architects have kind of disappointed themselves because they've forgotten who's using what their tools are, their drawings.
Yeah.
Now, I started helping framing crews do houses and realized that this thing doesn't get built the way you think it
That's
does.
right. Oh, yeah. I remember when I started drawing, and it may have taken a year or so, and when I went to a construction site, and I was like thinking, why am I drawing this like that? It's incorrect.
Right.
I'm doing it wrong, and nobody's telling me.
Where we just realize what steps this
Yes.
has to be built before this. I can't stand in midair and do this piece. And construction sites were always much more interesting to me than studios.
Yep.
Studios were fun play. Construction felt real. And you got the end result of what I think a lot of architects are looking for is the feedback of, no, this is real. These people can't do this until this happens.
Yeah.
And you start seeing the construction site as a completely different kind of orchestra with different rules and different instruments. But you're still making. And I think that's kind of the core thing that when I realized, go back to, why did you want to be an architect at 6? I liked making things. And I liked that when they were done, they were useful.
Yep.
That they did something. So ironically, kind of going back to that first architect that I really got to know and meet, he was a general contractor also. So had the opportunity to help a firm here in the Charlotte metro area to basically come in, and I've done this a couple of times where I get to play Mary Poppins, as I call it, come in and help them either with a cultural or a structural issue to kind of help rearrange the team. But as part of this one is it also had a construction company in lockstep with that company. I sat 6 feet away from the gentleman that ran the construction division and started seeing the process, how we could reweave it of simple things of how could we get interns to actually do processes that a superintendent could do.
Yes.
And you found a better result to say you took that load off that person and you got a better result. And as the architect, you got a better qualification of, yes, this is going to be built with the intent. But you also got the learning of going, oh, all those things that you and I enjoyed learning, as I say, on the pirate ship, of going, oh, you can tie that knot a different way. So anyway, I then decided to say, I think I want to do both. And as part of something as simple as shop drawings. Why do we have shop drawings? It's a conversation.
Right.
It's saying, this is what I want it to be specified in the quality. Now, can you show me what you're going to do? Not every general contractor and not every architect understands that is that conversation to get on the same page. What we realized is, but if you can have the designers also have input of that, you can shorten the process.
Oh, sure.
And where I think back to that liability issue, people were scared of that, of saying, no, you can't go across that line. That's their business and their liability. And in a lot of cases, it can be.
Sure.
On something smaller and more intricate, it can be supercharging because you're literally doing something that you now know is in the budget, that will work, it'll work in time.
Yep.
And you all end up being the hero because it's a better
100%.
symphony and the end user benefits.
Yep.
So just those kind of things, like as an architect, you learn, lack of a better term, the front half of the building code. The contractor has to deal with the back half of the building code of literally what is the spacing on X amount of attachments and those kind of things. And bringing them together was just kind of like another new set of paints to do that. So therefore, I sat for the exam and became a general contractor. That was actually both being driven by becoming a real estate developer. Now, I say that in a very small R and a very small D to say we're not doing large jobs. But what we found was one of the things I was taught as an architect is our job is to bring the highest and best use of the client's property.
Right.
And I started running into clients that said, I have this property and I don't know what the highest and best use. And they were talking about the return on investment, but they were also talking about what would be the best thing here. After getting to work with urban planners and town planners and doing that for neighborhoods and things that we were building those, you're kind of getting into the zoning of things of why that happens. That's kind of the bigger symphony that you're writing a smaller symphony for.
Yeah.
And these things just started meshing into one another. We're going, well, the development side says this. And I realized that since we keep architects and developers and contractors all at arm's reach,
Yes.
there's so much lost information.
Oh, 100%. Inefficiency.
Very much.
I
And
see
lost
it every
opportunity.
day. Yeah.
Simple things like, no, Mr. Architect, the decision you make still has to have a return on investment
Yes.
from what the developer or the commercial broker is looking at, and that is good. The problem is we keep the architect and the contractor as far at bay. This is the only person who knows what something costs from the person who's designing it.
Yeah.
So then you waste all that time and energy of value engineering or doing these other things. I mean, in the 90s and in early 2000s, it was called integrated practice. I felt integrated practice wasn't integrated enough.
Yes.
So I went, all right, I'll hold 3 of those positions and I still want to have other people at the table. But what I found is when you can literally start pricing something from a concept, you can compare concepts faster.
Right.
Should it be built out of brick? Should it be built out of concrete? Should it have no hallways? Should it have lots of hallways? And these all have impact on that return on investment. But you have to understand the end user, like a developer, to know what would the market buy. And to me, that was just another part of design's anthropology, to do that. So it's enjoyable to me. There's like, I literally start sketches, and one of my great mentors I think he was 72, had been practicing for 50 something years by the time I had joined that firm. And I came to that firm just because he did nothing but train the interns. He always told me, he said, you'll never be a real good architect, or you won't feel like you're an architect until you're in your 50s. Mm-hmm. And I would rephrase that to say, there's always a certain point where it's not about age. It's about whenever you think about a project and you can literally put it together in your head and it's natural, you now have a gift and a tool
Right.
to make that plastic. Now you have a way to get pricing and market and put those two things together.
Sure.
As strange as it sounds,
Yeah,
you just
no, I
keep
know what you
swirling
mean.
the pot.
Yeah.
But that was the motivation of saying, okay, I wanted to do the development and architecture and the construction and be able to do that. So we have some clients that basically said, look, we don't want to hire a developer and an architect in those. Can you just do all of those? And we simply say, yes, you run your business, you run your investment.
Yeah.
We'll bring back the questions that you need to answer on a regular basis and make it the process easier. And that's a very different experience than a lot of big projects or a lot of public projects that, of course, need all those eyes on it. But since everybody has a role, nobody's thinking about the synergy possibilities. And so we thankfully kind of get to bypass some of those and just integrate them.
So why do you think that? Because it makes so much sense. I don't think anybody's going to say, oh, no, that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that's not the norm? Why is everything silos? Is it the industry, the system, cultural? Where I'm from, it's more like that. It's more integrated.
Yeah.
It's everybody together. Not the design build that here they call design build, where an architect hires a contractor hires an architect. That's not design build. It's if they're in the same office every day sharing coffee, that's design build. You work together. You share responsibility. So why do you think that is not very common?
So I had the great opportunity while I was in Savannah working at a firm while going to school there that we did a lot of the school's buildings. Part of that was we actually got access to the historical archives. Every time the college bought a building, it was important to them to find out the history of that. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons the strange thing is a lot of their buildings were named after the architect or the builder of that building. And I thought that was gracious. I thought that was wonderful because it made me want to find out the story.
Sure.
So got to delve into these archives that are pre-Civil War. And in our country, that's that's history. Yeah. Not in a lot of other countries. It's like, that was recent. But I'm looking at all these contracts that are these long parchment papers. You got white gloves on, you're reading them. And I keep finding this name being about the contracts for this building or that building. And they were always talking about the undertaker. Well, the contract was maybe the railroad or maybe the city was having a contract built for the building or the town hall.
Yeah.
The undertaker was an architect. He was the undertaker of the project. And their job and role was defined as they were responsible for getting the building built.
Yeah.
They may not be the general contractor themselves, but they had a general contractor in their office, somebody who had that experience of building something. And at that point, they were also responsible for engaging all the guilds, the masonry guild, the water pipe guild, or these things, even before we called them subcontractors or vendors or things like that. There was still that hub of that person and that arrangement. So that really opened my ideas to that, to go, why did we stop doing that?
Sure.
And in the brief amount of research founding is when we, after World War II, there was just the process, especially with the military, to be fair, of multiple bids, and let's separate all of the liability of each one of these things. So I don't think it was an intended consequence, to answer your question in a long way.
Sure.
The problem with that unintended consequence is that we've put up more borders and boundaries between constructing and designing. But we also get the worst cases of, I think there's a little misconception about what architect's role is in a project from an owner's point of view. And we architects get our feelings hurt. And I go, there are times when you're not the director, you're not the executive producer in this project. You're basically the set designer.
Sure.
You're not the actors. Your name's not on the marquee, but that seems to be the tension for a large portion of the industry. So that's what I mean. It's a frustration that I don't think was intentional.
Yes.
But at some point you have to ask, what is your role?
Yeah, I think that the frustration comes from unrealistic expectations.
I agree.
That we didn't chose those expectations. It was just the industry put it there. Because one of the things that I always said is when an architect says, "Oh yeah, that's my project." Well, that's not your project.
Right.
Did you pay for it?
Right.
When you pay for it, that's your project. But
Yes.
if you're not paying for the construction, that's not your project. So that right there, that taking ownership of something that's not yours, that's unhealthy.
I agree.
Because then you develop this emotional connection with this thing.
Your perspective gets skewed.
And it's not yours.
Right.
So they may be nice and let you play with that.
That's a great way to put it.
But then at some point, you're going to be very frustrated.
Yes.
Very frustrated because it's not your project. So you might own the design process, but not the project or even the design. And I go through that because sometimes I do something and the client makes a change that inside I'm cringing.
Right.
Like, oh my God. But then I feel bad for a couple of days and then I go back and say, well, if it meets code, if they're happy, if the intent is there, then that's fine. I mean, what do I gain by feeling bad or frustrated about something that I cannot really control?
I have to blame the industry of architecture of constantly shedding off things that they don't want to do. And of course, the stereotype of architects is they just want to design. Well, and that is a lot of core reason of why a lot of us got into the business.
Yeah.
But we've kept shedding off all these responsibilities to understand. But if you were the undertaker, you would have that. And the irony is, I think that corporations, organizations, nonprofits are all coming back to, we just need somebody on our team that can undertake this whole project.
Yes.
The Power of Design podcast is brought to you by OSA Studio, a multidisciplinary design firm focused on creating impactful experiences through the power of design. We partner with our clients to create buildings, interior spaces, brands, and strategies that help you deliver a successful project. As a minority-owned firm, we are committed to building a diverse platform of curious and driven design professionals so we can together pursue our full potential. For more information, please visit us at www.osastudio.com.
That is the best name for a firm. The Undertaker.
Undertakers.
Yes.
We always wear black anyway. So we just go back with
amazing.
The hats.
The Undertakers.
No coffins in the office, but but it truly is. And that's kind of one of the things that we thinking is like, what would that be? One of our jobs is to be able to look at a rough stone. And when the client asks, what's the highest and best use for that? The only thing is you can't have one perspective of that is it's skewed. You literally have to have the perspective of that same stone from multiple different angles. And to be able to say, oh, it has a flaw over here, but that's easily overcome. Mm-hmm. Every problem has flaws that you can solve and some you can't. So by looking at all those individual facets, you can come up with saying, you're going to lose X amount of this stone, but it's going to become something that's higher and better use. Yeah. So even if you are that undertaker, you can't have a myopic view of based upon that. And maybe that's part of the I don't know if it's the education of architects or if it's just our national tendency to lock in on something as a solution.
Yes.
Musicians don't do that.
Yes, that is a good point because it's a solution because we're problem solvers.
Yes.
Right? I think we get energized and excited by solving problems.
Yes.
The thing is that we need to be solving the right problem.
The right question.
Most people are solving the wrong question, the wrong problem, and it's going nowhere.
Yes.
So that's why defining what the problem is huge.
It is. And it's where that line gets blurred, as you said, is this the architect's question or the architect's team's question? Or is this the end user's question? And that to me was one of the beautiful things about design thinking from Stanford's design school of it takes all of that out. Yeah. Because it truly just focuses on what is the end user's highest and best use.
Sure.
So it was like getting an extra tool to help weed through all of the design possibilities that I could think up that would be overwhelming and get to the ones that truly are the better questions.
Yeah.
And people get excited about that.
Oh, sure.
Because they almost sniff it out.
It's energizing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you hope your new firm is going to do? Development, construction, architecture. How do you see you and your new business going into the next 5-10 years?
So part of it is, again, lots of facets on the same gym. Of going, yes, there are projects that we do as just the architect, and there are some that we do as the contractor if we were a part of the project to begin with. Because again, if you're going to separate those two, we're probably not the best. In other words, we don't bid projects.
Yeah.
We simply look at them as a developer to say, let's set the budget. And the nice thing about having that knowledge of cost before I start designing, I can compare the A versus B quicker, where the average general contractor is incredibly good at building something. What not a lot of them do well is they can't estimate something until all of the drawings are done.
100%.
It goes back to that liability issue that they're going to be stuck in a contract based upon the lines that are on that. And I get that. The beauty is we get to blur that little reality line of saying, but I can get a better answer to the owner to say, if we do A, it's going to cost this much. If we do B, it's this. And I haven't done all the drawings. I'm able to project what that should be and then let them make a better decision. Yeah. And to say, it's usually based upon that return on investment or that final use. So by blurring those lines, we get into some unique projects.
Yep.
Ones that honestly, a lot of our clients don't come to me with a set idea, which is obviously more fun now after doing this 35 years of going, that's if you wrote it out, well, why don't you just do it?
They don't bring you a sketch and say, do a permit set out of this.
Still, yes, and thankfully I've said no about 3 times this month to those to say, you really don't need me.
Yeah,
you don't want to pay me what that would actually take.
Yes,
let me refer you to. They don't even need an architect, or this would be a better solution for you.
Yeah,
and a lot less frustrating for me.
Sure,
to be true, but that so it's becoming even more. The more ambiguous the project, the more I love it. Back to design thinking, where you're saying a lot of solutions are, we're at A, we want to get to B. If you can fully define B, that's a great way. And there's some great tools in design thinking to get you through that path.
Yeah.
It's the fuzzy goals that seem to be more interesting. Like, we're point A, we've got to go win the war. Well, there's no straight line to that, but you absolutely know when you cross that line, which is usually a big arc, it could be here, it could be here.
Sure.
But you know that you won the war by the results. And that to me is a lot more like development. That's the question that developers are asking about the market, having to do the financing. What does that do? You have to get multiples of those across the line. So yeah, it's the fuzzy goal questions that I tend to, that's what we're bumping up against and finding. And those are challenging and fun.
Yeah, well, that's exciting, man. I can't wait to see what you guys are going to come up with.
We'll see if this crazy idea works.
Yeah, it has to work.
Oh,
There is no other option.
There's been enough response that thankfully that the people we've gotten to serve have said, you take a lot of time and effort. They've heard the horror stories from other companies and C-suite people that said, I used to work for this company. Now I'm working for this project. And I go, that's not your job. That's our job. So let us work on your project for you.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are the most fun to serve. They're appreciative. Honestly, I have more creativity to pour out in those than I do in the ones that say, hey, I just needed this. Can you get me a permit for that? That's great. Probably not your fit.
Sure.
So,
yeah, there are all kinds of architects, all kinds of designers. There is a fit for everybody.
I don't like labels.
Yes.
I think that's part of my core DNA.
So where do you think that comes from? Why are you like that?
Oddly, it kind of goes back to I'm the first person in my family to go to college, get a professional degree, to get a master's degree. And I've always enjoyed learning. I've never been keen on academics. But I think from an early stage, I learned what the Latin method of learning was, which is learn the vocabulary, then find out the logic, what does work and what doesn't work. And then you get to the point of rhetoric, which then you get to swap ideas with other people. The reason I reached out to you is like, I can't believe you know the vocabulary. You like the logic. Let's talk about this. And when you've been able to build teams like that, it's the fun part of interns. My son's taking a gap year and he's working because he wants to see if he wants to do one of these three things.
Yeah.
And I've told him, I said, just write down any acronym that we use that you don't know, because a lot of people use acronyms and that's not really what they mean.
Right.
I find that when I interview my clients and I'm trying to get to know their world, and I raise my hand and say, tell me what that means.
Sure.
And they go, well, we say this, but we mean that.
Right.
Back to the Latin method that's the fun part to me of learning those different things, because you start blurring those lines. And even though the vocabulary is helpful, it was never made to be the limiting label. So when somebody says, hey, I would have loved to be an architect, but I wasn't good at math. And I'm going, wrong label.
Correct.
That's not the use. I know engineers that I trust daily that they're actually great designers, but they also know math. Sure. So they understand, and the amount of math that they really use is a lot smaller than the average person would realize.
Yep.
They're not mathematicians. They're not into the imaginary of it. But that's what I mean, is to answer your question, is the labels almost never work.
Yes.
For individuals or for projects.
I really like that, because labels, once you marry yourself to a label, you're trapped in there. And not even to what others say about the label, about what that label means to you.
Yes.
And that's where people, sometimes I always like to say that I like to change my mind on anything, throughout my life. I don't want to be the same person I was a year ago. And I challenge my beliefs, what I think.
Yeah.
And when people say, no, I'm just like that. I've always been like that. And, I say, well, maybe if you try being different, you had a different experience, maybe you like it better, maybe not.
Right.
But I think that flexibility is a skill that I want to cultivate in my life.
Well, the funny thing is when I hear you talk about branding,
Yeah.
that's the amazing thing to me, is you're trying to define something, but you're not trying to label it. You're trying to use the common vocabulary so somebody would understand what that is. But it's still kind of that art of words that, well, that's the palette, it's the word. And are you really mean that this thing is a A, or is this thing a B?
Yeah.
And that helps other people become accessible to a brand when you make it easier for them to understand, what do you really mean? And part of that, I think, is the same thing when you're trying to explain a design. Architects get way into the weeds on the tech of something without giving the backstory of
context.
That. We stole the idea of storyboarding a building from friends in the animation world. It's a great way to explain the way this building is going to act at the end without using architecture terms.
Yeah.
They don't care what a partie is.
Yeah.
They don't care what a lot of these things that we're taught as students is. But they do understand the story.
Right.
And that there is a end result of somebody is happy about this space.
Yeah.
And they either identify with that or they don't. And if they don't, then we go, great, let's back up because we've got the wrong story.
Right.
So,
well, and the other thing is in that buyer and seller relationship, when you're working for a client, they're always buying every interaction you're having with them.
Yes.
So if they're not getting what they want or what they expect, they're going to stop buying.
I would.
Yeah. So
that's not an experience I want to have.
What's interesting is I always try to say, okay, how do I put myself in their shoes and point of view so I can speak from their point of view and not mine?
Yeah.
Mine is different, but I need to start with them. Or how do I rephrase what I think is best with their language, with their priorities? So they feel, because people buy when they... People don't buy when they understand. They buy when they feel understood.
Agreed. Absolutely.
So once you find, you make somebody feel understood, they feel great. They feel value. They feel that they matter.
Right.
That they were heard.
Yes.
And now they're open. I always say at my office that what we're really selling is it might be a stretch. I don't know. You tell me. I said that we're not selling architectural or branding services. What we sell is how people feel about themselves when they're interacting with us or our projects.
Did they get the result of what they wished for?
Right.
Not necessarily thought they wanted, but you've taken them through the process long enough to go, that's great, but this is just a step over the fence. It's not an entire journey across the sea.
Right.
And when people see those, that improves that experience. They feel like there's more value in that solution than maybe what they came up with. And they realize, oh, I don't have to go around the world for this.
Sure.
It's right here.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the part that any designer or any creative is supposed to, bring to that.
Yeah.
Leading creative people for 30 years is the funny thing, is the scariest thing is bored creative people. They will make their own problems.
Yes.
I don't know if we learned that from architecture school or something else, but that was, a running gag in our office about just that. So, and it's like, well, if you're bored and you need a problem to solve, find at least a good problem to solve.
Yes. Find the right problem.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Find one that's going to be useful forever.
Sure.
A lot of design ends up being, is it curious and interesting? Well, that may be a trend. Is it something that truly equates to that long-term thinking like a developer? Okay, that's worth time and effort to spend doing that. And so we kind of keep going as like, what's curious and what's classic?
Yeah.
Because back to what your question about all those styles, we can put names to it, but there's all firms, designers, and everybody else that it was like, that was brilliant for the time. And it was a reason of that time. It was the zeitgeist of that time. But now it's just a curiosity. Yeah. That didn't become a classic. Yeah. And that's, of course, I went to school in the 90s, so postmodernism was all about that.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Me too.
But I'm not throwing a baby out with the bathwater. I'm just going, that was a fixation of labels to me.
Yes.
Back to, but the word doesn't mean what you say it means.
Right.
And that's the struggle we have now to say, but it brings value when we don't use the label and just use the thing.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
Anyway,
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Honor to be here. Appreciate
I
it.
really appreciate you sharing your expertise, experience, and wisdom, and I can't wait to see what you guys are doing.
Well, we'll come back and share more stories from the trenches later.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Design podcast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review if you like this content. And find us online at thepowerofdesignpodcast.com. I invite you to join my mission to become a better version of yourself through the power of design.